And
hi,
welcome.
Rita. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Good to see you. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Rita is a Lebanese-American photojournalist and currently based in Beirut. And your work is mostly focused on refugees and displacement and migration and uprisings and all the good things, right?
All the things that Lebanon has to offer. We have a bit of everything here. So,
Rita, I wanted to start off by asking you, what are your earliest memories of photography? What drew you to this medium of expression?
I think there was a bit of a connection that I made with photography, a personal connection to people that I didn't really know. My mom had a photo album of her family who had emigrated to the US, and we were living in Beirut. So she had this photo album of her siblings, her parents, and she wanted me to get to know them. So she would go through them and tell me their names. And I looked through this photo album so many times because, you know, I fell in love with these people who I hadn't met yet. And so that's the first time that I thought, okay, this is a picture. It's representing somebody else. It's someone who, not someone else, someone that's not here. And then there was another incident of a woman who was wearing a pendant, a picture of her children. It was 4 of them. And as a young kid, I mean, I thought it was the band ABBA. Because it was young people, 2 had light hair, 2 had dark hair. And I remember the conversation where my mom was asking her who they were, and she said that they were her children. They had been killed in a bombing. So those were things that had affected me. And I mean, you know, maybe one in a positive way, maybe one was a bit traumatic, but it made me feel that this photo makes a connection from you to someone else or to something else or something that you care about or that's important.
Wow, beautifully expressed. Did you ever make work out of those photographs? Did you ever revisit this photo album?
The photo album for sure. The woman I found where she used to live and where her daughter continued to live, but I haven't made the connection because I felt a bit intrusive. Maybe someday, because she had met my mom at my aunt's house, so someday maybe I can meet her through my cousins. But I remember the pendant, but I don't remember I don't remember the very specific details, just my memory of like who I thought it was, you know.
And when did you, I mean, how long have you been photographing? When did you, can we say, find your voice in photography through the media?
I've been doing it a little over 10 years. I was a bit of a late bloomer with it. I started off in school in filmmaking, but I didn't feel that the connection with it that I do in documentary style photography. I love film and I love art in general, but I think I'm drawn to storytelling in the photojournalistic way. So it took me a while to realize that. So I started in my mid-30s, and I think it took several events for me to really, you know, to really realize that. I think the first one was, you know, the July war in 2006 in Lebanon when I was far away, and I was drawn, like I was constantly reading the news. Growing up, I didn't like the news, and that's why I think I like going into film. Growing up, I didn't like the news at all. My dad was listening to it constantly, so I didn't like it. And I think in 2006 was when I personally made that switch, and I started listening to the news all the time and looking at these photographs. And I switched from, you know, the way to tell stories in film is beautiful, and in scripts and in books and in fiction, but I switched over to wanting to tell stories of people, you know, in the documentary way. But it took a long time. I mean, I didn't really start showing my photographs until I was in my mid-30s. And I did that with my coworkers in New York. We would have these contests because none of us wanted to work in an office. So we would have these contests at work, and there were these techie guys that, you know, helped me look into which camera I would want to buy.
It's interesting that you mentioned that 2006 was the turning point that made you want to switch into photography and storytelling. I had the similar experience. You know, being there, being a witness, and then having this urge to just, you know, amplify voices and tell stories that aren't being documented, right? There's so much going on that's aside from the photojournalism world or what gets shown in the media. What's interesting now is that I follow you on Instagram. You're the meter maid. Everyone should follow you, and you're super active. You're in and out of, you know, one story after the other, and constantly sharing beautiful and very evocative photo stories. Can you maybe tell us a bit about, you know, the stories that you do, the work that you do, the publications you deal with?
The stories I've been working on are mostly recently have been assignment based. I work with the Public Source, the Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera English, and sometimes they can be like a very personal or cultural story. I did a story this past year on Mune, you know, where I ended up going to my own village and I interviewed my aunt and my cousin and photographed the Mune that they do. But at the same time, like that correlates to what's going on in Lebanon with the financial crisis, because a lot of people are going back to these old ways of saving money and doing things. And then, you know, they can be things like a commemoration of the Sabra and Shatila massacre, or the electricity crisis in Lebanon, protests. So that's the thing with journalism. It's good to tell what's local and what's going on locally, but we have this way of needing these round numbers that I wish we can move away from. Like, okay, it's been 40 years since the Sabra and Shatila massacre, so now we talk about it again when we hadn't talked about it in 5 years or 10 years. So there is something to be said about journalism working on assignments, but it's also important to, I think, for any photographer who's working on like long form storytelling, to have their own personal stories that they're working on.
Yeah, this brings me to my next question. So aside from the assignments, what are some of your personal projects?
One personal project currently is telling the story of emigration. It's something I obviously like relate to personally because my family emigrated to the US. But so many of my friends have left. So many young people are leaving. And I remember there was a point in time where I was saying, don't leave Lebanon, you know, give your talent, your creativity to your own country. But it's a bit of a privileged thing to say when you have a passport to leave. Yeah. You know, when people need to leave because their families don't have money for medicine, their families don't have money for food or rent, and then they leave and they support their families from abroad. So that's a story I'm working on, but quite slowly, because it does feel it's something that you really need to get to know the person first. If they're not already a friend of yours, you need to kind of move slowly and not be intrusive on such personal moments with their families.
And how do you build those relationships?
I don't have a specific answer. I think each person is different. Sometimes people they approach you and they say, "Hey, I'm also leaving, and I want you to do this," because sometimes they'll see a story that you share, and they'll want you to document it. Sometimes you can post it on social media or tell contacts and say, "I'm trying to do this," and people will approach you, but I think it's very important for consent, and when you tell them, I will document this, but I'm not going to share something you don't want shared. Or if there's any point you're uncomfortable, I'm happy, you know, I could leave or I could step out. Look through the photographs with them. Say, are there any photographs here that you don't want to share? And if their families are in the photographs, you can also talk to the families. So the more you let them know that it's their voice and it's their story, and they're in the driver's seat, and you're just, you know, I'm the messenger of that story, but they're part of telling that message. I think that's what's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's pivotal. Consent and trust. So aside from, you cover some pretty heavy topics, where do you find your inspiration in Lebanon? Besides, having to do all these assignments, do you ever take any more sort of joyful photographs that are just a break from?
I take a lot of photographs of cats. I take photographs by the water. I take long walks in Beirut. I like photographing the streets. I like the quiet moments. There's so many still like gems, like little stores that are on the corners that are still, that I worry they're not going to be there for that much longer. So yeah, I get these inspirations just by walking around, and of cats in the water.
Cats should be photographed.
Yeah.
Can you maybe tell us a bit about the winning photograph?
Sure. Let me share the photograph so everyone can see. Okay, so this is Wafa. This story was for an assignment for Middle East Eye on the Sabra and Shatila 40-year anniversary. So Wafa is a survivor, and she's someone that I interviewed. And the interview went on for about an hour, where she told me about her memories, and it was a bit draining for her. So actually, because I was writing the story, the interview, I had some questions, and she spoke about it in detail, and I could tell that towards the end of the interview she was getting emotionally tired from it. So when it came time for the pictures, usually I ask people to give me a half hour of their time or longer, because the longer you spend with someone, the more comfortable they are. In this instance, I just asked her if I can maybe walk with her. We had met at an NGO nearby. I asked if I could just walk with her so we could, kind of get out of that space and just to the front of her house, and to photograph her in front of her house. And I took maybe 5 or 6 frames because, again, I felt like I had taken up so much of her time and her energy. And so this is in Shatila, where there isn't that much light because the buildings are built so close together. And you can see with the laundry, it's unlike other areas in the country and in Beirut, where it's not necessarily on a balcony. There's not that much light that's coming on it. And to the left of the photo is the entrance to her house that's also covered with a blanket. So like the movement of the laundry and the blanket, and then just her in the center. After I took a few frames, I felt like this is enough, and I'm gonna let her get on with her day.
Wow, beautiful. So Rita, what does photography mean to you? If you can just tell us a bit about why you choose to photograph. Do you feel it has an impact in the world? Just if you could elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. When I first started in photography, I felt like let's do something that may have an impact on the world, but it's also important to know that a lot of the stories you work on may not have an impact. Maybe they may have an emotional impact on the readers and the people that are looking at the photographs. But what I generally tell people in the beginning is that this likely won't change very much, because I don't want them to have this false idea. So many stories have been done on things that haven't really changed much. And as a photojournalist, we take a lot of time, images, space from people, and it's important to be honest with them that we're trying, but in the likelihood that things will change is probably going to be due to a lot of effort put together. It's not going to be from one story. When one story makes a big change, it's I think what gives us inspiration to continue, but those stories are few and far in between. I'm sorry, I think I forgot the first part of your question. What does photography mean to me? I think it holds on. It makes this moment, it holds it still for a while so that we don't forget it. And I think that's probably the most important part of photography for me, is to just not to forget and to hold on to the memory.
Yeah. Do you maintain contact with your subjects. I don't like the word subjects, but with the people that you photograph, after you're done with an assignment, do you visit them again? Does the relationship continue somehow?
Yes. Several times. There was a story that I did in Quarantina, where I go back often and see people. I mean, you build friendships, and once in a while someone, because in journalism, you're not supposed to help anyone financially. You're not supposed to give anyone money, because then it may affect the outcome of the story. But once a story is out there, sometimes people will reach out and they'll say, I want to help this person out. Like, I mean, it's very little, but if I can help them out, I'd like to help them out. So sometimes I've gone back to put someone in contact with somebody else. Other times it's a friendship. Like, you build a friendship and a connection with people. It's harder when you don't live in the space. This is where I think it's easier to maintain these relationships when you are a local journalist and you have access to people. With, you know, when you're a traveling journalist, when you're like visiting a place for a short time, you can maintain it through phone or social media. But I find that a lot of times when that happens, the person may change their phone number. Like, I followed the refugee trail from Lesbos to Germany, and a lot of the people I'm no longer in touch with because they changed their phone numbers, or they don't have an account on Facebook anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So you do a lot of projects abroad as well? You get assignments?
Not really. For the past 5 years, I've been mostly Lebanon based. And I think I do better work when it is local, because I can go back and it's easier to say, hey, I need to tell this story deeper. I'm going to go back the next day.
Yeah. But you grew up in the US. You grew up in New York. Am I correct?
From the time I was 10, we moved to the US. I grew up in Lebanon until I was 10. And then I was in Buffalo, New York for high school, college, and then in New York City for work. Yes.
Do you ever photograph in New York?
Mostly street photography. It's hard to, because I'm there for short periods now, so it's hard to do any assignment work while I'm there. But even when I'm in New York, I want to do more stories on like diaspora community, whether it's like Lebanese or Palestinian or Syrian. It's more like something that I have a connection with.
Yeah. Thank you, Rita. Just one final question. So you know that Tasweer is quite new. It's just begun its journey as a festival and a grant awarding entity. So from your perspective, what do you think that the photography festival today, what does a photography festival today need to be doing? What's the best advice you can give us about how to support photography in the region?
I mean, I think the best, and maybe you are already doing this and you've already thought or spoken about this, to be as inclusive as possible, because even within our region, there are travel restrictions for people in Lebanon. Even as Lebanese citizens, it's hard to even get a passport now. And so you could imagine when you think about that with the Palestinian community or the Syrian community and refugees. So to be as inclusive as possible, maybe digitally when the person can't travel, let's say there's a festival like that's physical and the person cannot travel, to somehow include them, to provide context. I mean, a lot of people's success is because someone introduced them to someone. So if there's a way for Tasweer to connect people like editors and photographers, it would be very helpful. Mentorships I find have helped people who had started off maybe just a couple years ago and now they're winning awards. So mentorships are very helpful. Grant applications that can be in the person's local language, because I think there's a lot of talented photographers that are not strong in English. So sometimes the writing for the grant application or their story idea may not feel as strong. So like language skills. Also, we tend to get, I think, pigeonholed, like, okay, you're from Lebanon. And although like for me, I want to tell the social issues and I want to tell it photojournalistically, I think there are a lot of photographers who are artists. So when you have categories and you have a variety, then you can, because maybe there's a migrant domestic worker who wants to tell a story on how she sees, I don't know, graffiti, or she wants to do something about, you know, like the beauty of the environment. So we tend to pigeonhole people into like to tell like the story about, I don't know, in Lebanon, like around the blast, maybe like, you know, people wanted to talk about like the chaos, but there are so many artists who want to do stories that are beyond photojournalism. So I think different categories would be helpful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. That's super helpful. Well, beautiful talking to you, Rita, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and for the time, and Mabruk again.
Thank you so much
with your future projects. I hope to see more of your work, and I'll keep following you on Instagram.
I'll be following you too. Thank you, Rola.
Take care, Rita.
You do too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.